So Dorpaton has responded to my introspective argument video and argued that it wouldn't be true if property dualism was true. Okay, so what's he saying here? So I was arguing that if both immaterial mind and physical matter exist, there would be a substance dualism, and since we know that the mind is immaterial and dualism is impossible, then therefore physical matter cannot exist. He then responds by arguing that it doesn't need to be a substance dualism, but it could be a property dualism instead. So, in other words, you could have physical objects with mental properties sort of glued onto them. And thus there would be no interaction between the physical and mental properties, and so this would thereby bypass the interactionism problem that refutes dualism. But now here are some of the problems with property dualism. Firstly, it's not parsimonious or even verifiable, and so there's no reason to posit it. Everything that we interact with, we do so on a mental level only. You don't see physical properties in themselves. You experience the qualia that come from them, and those are purely mental, and then of course we deduce that physical properties exist from that. But now if, as property dualism suggests, these mental properties are sort of tacked on or supervenient to the physical properties, they would never actually interact with them. But if they never interact with them, then we have no reason to assume that physical properties exist at all. It could just be mental properties interacting with other mental properties. And since all we have is mental properties to experience anyway, there is no reason to assume physical properties exist. They don't contribute to explaining anything new, and we could explain the world just as well without them. So there's really no reason to assume property dualism. It's sort of ad hoc in a way. The second problem is that there is no reason why mental properties should be glued onto physical objects. Now, if we were to assume that there was a reason, that reason would have to include some epistemic link between material and mental properties, right? But wait a minute here. Material and mental properties are epistemically disconnected. That was the whole point behind Joseph Levine's explanatory gap. There are subjective properties and objective properties, and we can't explain one in terms of the other. In a way, this parallels the interactionism problem, but instead of physically interacting, the two sets of properties are sort of interacting, as it were, on an epistemic level. So there can be no reason why property dualism should be true, even if it does happen to turn out to be true. The third problem is that property dualism contradicts free will. Now, for the average atheist, or say a Calvinist theist, this isn't going to be a problem, as they reject free will, but Dorpaton, like me, you affirm the existence of free will. So this is going to be a problem for you. And actually, you have a pretty good reason for believing free will, too. You point out that if we don't have free will, we can't trust our own thoughts, as we wouldn't actually be causing them. And I agree with that. By the way, Dorpaton has a video on this called To Deny Free Will Requires Free Will, and it's actually pretty good. I favorited it a while back, and it's in the description below, so go check it out and leave some nice comments. Now, don't be smart-alecky or anything, just be nice and leave some legitimate nice comments. Okay, so now the reason this would contradict free will, and this comes from John Searle, whose paper I've included below, is that if mental properties are tacked onto physical objects, then the mental properties wouldn't actually have any causal agency of their own, right? The physical objects would just be whirring along like cogs in a machine, just as they would if there were no mental properties attached to them at all. And the mental properties would then be sort of along for the ride and wouldn't have any control of where the ride is actually taking them. So there would be no free will under property dualism because the mind would not have any room to actually act. Now at this point, none of these reasons are actually firm defeaters. With the first reason, the fact that something isn't parsimonious or doesn't explain anything doesn't actually rule it out. And with the second reason, maybe there isn't a reason why mental and physical attributes should be glued together. But they do anyway. After all, this is the position of anomalous monism. Property dualism is true, but there is no reason why it should be true, it just is. That's what it says. And of course, regarding free will, you can just say that you don't have free will. This will be a defeater for Dorpaton and myself, but not for anyone rejecting free will. So up to this point, none of these actually rule out property dualism. However, my next argument will. The firm defeater for property dualism is that you can actually show that the mind cannot be a property or a process, but rather must actually be a thing. And here it goes. Premise 1. If solipsism is conceivable, then the universe could exist such that only the mind exists. Premise 2. Solipsism is conceivable. Conclusion 1. Thus the universe could exist with only the mind in it. Premise 3. Universes cannot only consist of properties or processes, but must also include things. Right? You can't have a universe with properties in it with no actual things with those properties. And then conclusion 2, thus the mind cannot be a property or a process, but rather must be an entity. And of course then, since we know that the mind is a substantive thing and is immaterial, which we can also show from the conceivability of solipsism, and also that substance dualism is false, then the introspective argument holds, and thus monistic idealism is necessarily true. Alright, that's it. See you guys later.
If you like this video, subscribe, and don't forget to check out my novel, Alaris, The Lances of Light, on Amazon Kindle in the description below.